Hello guys, welcome to one of the most important lessons in this course. This lesson is going to be for you the door to the next level. And I know that you're looking at this position in front of you and you're thinking, I've seen this so many times, no one has made such a big deal out of it. So what's the big deal? Well, there are two main points about this lesson. Number one, this opening, guys, for starters. And of course, I'm going to show you the opening moves to get to this position. But one of the main points about this lesson is that this opening can be played in two different ways. You could play it more aggressively, like if you go here 95 and then pawn to f4 followed by rook f3, rook h3, you could actually play it very aggressively, attacking the king, and many people enjoy it that way. But at the same time, you could also play it more strategically. So here, instead of 95, you could do pawn to c4, and in this kind of positions, you have to pay attention to the changes in the center. Back in lesson number 101, we talked about isolated pawns. That's something you could get here. You could also get hanging pawns, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So this is why, guys, this opening is so important that you learn it, that you get exposure to it at this point in the course. When we started in this course talking about openings, the first time we just started to play chess, we didn't talk about openings. Then when we started to talk about openings more seriously, I introduced you to the king's pawn openings. That's the way to go. So we talked about the four knights, the Vienna, then we talked about the London system, and of course the Pirs, the King's Indian attack, the Russian defense, all of these openings. But now it is time for you to get exposure to this opening. And that's the second point about this lesson. In this lesson, you're going to learn how advanced players prepare their openings. And I'm not talking about what we talked about in lesson number 72, where to get the information. No. I'm talking about what you should know in order to understand, in order to learn an opening properly. So the things that we have to cover, and you're going to see it in this lesson. We're going to study this opening the way that you should. So first, of course, we have to learn the opening moves. So what moves do we have to do to get to this position? And I'm going to teach it to you in a moment. It's pretty simple. When it comes to that, this opening doesn't require a lot of memorization. You just need to know where your pieces go. Second, we need to learn the middle game plans. What are the typical middle game plans? Well, I just told you two of them. So 95 followed by f4, rook f3, and the other one, of course, is c4, and you're going to learn more about it. Then we also have to talk within this middle game plans. We have to talk about ideal positions. So what is the ideal position that I want to get to, and what are the typical mini maneuvers for me to get to those positions? And here, just to give you, maybe this is not the best example, but if I know that I want to get to an ideal position, let me see, something like this. I'm just doing, guys, pretty bad moves here, but if I want to get to a position like this, well, what are the mini maneuvers? I need to centralize the knight to e5, followed by f4 to offer support. I need to do the rook lift. So you need to get familiarized with this. Now, the other part, and this is extremely important, we're going to be doing it in a moment. We need to get familiarized with the different pawn structures. What are the typical pawn structures in this position? And if you understand this, you're going to know what your plans are. Okay, my pawn structure is like this. I remember that I need to occupy these squares. I need to use these files, and so on. And of course, we have to review games played by other players, guys. That way you can see how they put this in action. And that's something that we're going to do here. I'm going to be showing you a few games. I'm going to be leaving you other games for you to review after the lesson. But there's something that I didn't mention, and it's really, really important. Many people do not even think of endgames when you are preparing your openings. That's something else. You need to get familiarized with the typical endgames that you get out of your openings. So your openings are going to lead to specific middle game position types, and from those typical positions you could get specific typical endgames, and that's something that you need to be familiar with. So guys, let's get started. Now you know what we're looking for, what we're going to be trying to do. So let's learn more about this opening. Even if you don't like this opening, well, you know what you should be looking for in whatever opening you're deciding to study and learn. So let me go all the way back, and before we start going in order, let me show you guys quickly something that a lot of my students like here is that you could, once you do this knight e5 idea, and I know I showed you some of it before, But let's say we get to this point, rook f3. This is a pretty straightforward plan. Let's say they just go a6. Again, I'm just doing some random moves here. Rook f3, let's say b5. Now, there's a plan. Like if I want, whenever I want my students to really start playing these, I need to get them hooked with it. So I just showed them this plan. This is one of the typical plans where the idea, as you can see, is to put pressure directly on the king. And many people might think here that it's about bringing the queen over and putting more pressure, but right now you have this tactical continuation. You just go bishop h7, knight takes, then queen h5, and we're threatening to take the knight with checkmate, but even if they move the knight away, we have checkmate, right? So I just showed them this and they're already eager to try it, and that's how they buy into this opening. But then little by little, they're gonna get more exposure as well to the other variation with c4, and that's what I'm expecting from you guys. If you're not interested in this other part, well, start playing it more aggressively, and then sometimes you try this c4 plan, or the other way around. If you enjoyed this more, you could do this, and then sometimes you could just go 95, f4, and so on. So anyways, let's get started. Before we talk about the specific pawn structures, the different plans that we should do according to them, let's learn the opening moves, guys. So you're gonna start with the queen's pawn opening, so d4, then d5, and it's all about knowing where your pieces go. This knight is gonna go to f3, this bishop goes to d3, and this knight goes to d2 to protect the other knight, right? So you could think about it that way. And then this bishop, you're gonna see it in the fianchetto. So you're gonna get something like this. Then this bishop again goes to d3. Guys, one of the coolest thing about this opening is that the move order is not so important. It's very flexible. So if one day you forget and you do the fianchetto first, not a big deal, right? So bishop d3, bishop e7. Now we go bishop b2, c5. Now, whenever you see c5, we do not worry about it. We're not going to take. We need this pawn here to support e5. So we could just castle, and now knight b to d2, and you're going to see your pieces are already developed, you're controlling the center, and you are castled. If they take, we're going to replace that pawn with another pawn, right? And from here, we just play chess. You could, again, do 95, followed by, so let's say, okay, let's say they just go b6, then you could do f4, or you could look into ideas with c4 and so on, right, guys? So this is pretty much the move order. I'm going to be showing you games afterwards. We're going to talk a lot about this opening, so don't worry, don't think that you have to memorize it right now, okay? So by the end of this lesson, you're going to know the move order. Now let's talk about the first pawn structure that you're going to see a lot. Well, this is exactly what we had before, and the main takeaway from here is that whenever you have this pawn structure, you have to keep an eye out for this e5 square. If you have a knight, the knight typically wants to get there, and from e5, your knight is going to be putting a lot of pressure in your opponent's territory. Of course, you're also going to have a bishop on b2, helping you with that, and if the pawn ever moves, that bishop is going to be pretty active there. Now, the main thing about this pawn structure is when the black pieces trade on d4. You're going to see this in the games that I'm going to show you, and you're going to see how it is not such a good idea most of the time. So that position would be something like this. They just took, we take back. Guys, sometimes this pawn is on b6, sometimes it's not. It doesn't matter. What matters to us is that, again, we're going to be controlling this e5 square, but now, since the pawn is not on e3 anymore, you could put a rook on e1 to control e4. If they ever put a knight there, remember your bishop is going to be here, you're going to have a knight, so your rook is also helping control e4, but at the same time is bringing support to e5. But more importantly, that same rook could use the e3 square to do a rook lift and a rook rollover since the pawn is not there. And you see, that rook lift is a mini maneuver typical of this opening, so it's something for you to be open to. So anyways, that's what we get out of this pawn structure. Now the other pawn structure is going to be this one, and remember, this is the plan where they just do pawn to c4 instead of 95 right away. Well, here, guys, what you need to know is that whenever this is happening, this tension in the center, we need to pay close attention to the changes in the pawn structure. We could get, like I said before, isolated pawns. We have talked about that on lesson number 101. So if you're not familiar with how to play against the isolated pawn, if you don't know how to play, if you have it, go back to lesson number 101. Now, the main thing is when the black pieces decide to take. So I'm going to show you later, I'm going to talk more about this, but if they decide to take, let's say they take on c4, you take back, they take on d4, you take back, you're going to get a position like this where you have two hanging pawns. And of course that comes with an isolated pawn. Now, when we have the hanging pawns, you need to understand why these pawns are so valuable. First of all, we're controlling all of these squares, which means the black pieces are going to have a hard time to maneuver in the center. At the same time, we're offering support to our own pieces. If we have a knight on f3, of course, the pawn is going to be defending it. But also, if you have these pawns, you have to be looking for ways to create a passed pawn, guys. You have to put your pieces in a way that at some point you could push and create a passed pawn. Another thing to keep in mind is that this isolated pawn, we could push it. Of course, we have to prepare it, but we could push it. And if they take, not only do we get rid of our isolated pawn, but we could have a passed pawn. Without this pawn on b6, our c pawn is going to be passed. So you see, these are little things that we need to know because you're gonna get this pretty often, and it helps a lot to know what the plan is. I know that this part is pretty boring without the pieces on the board, but it is going to make more sense when we're going through the games. Okay, so now it's time, guys. All of the things that I just mentioned, we're going to reinforce them throughout the remaining of the lesson. Now it's time to go over a few games played by someone else. I'm not gonna go too deep into the opening moves, but this is going to be another opportunity for you to try to memorize it and to understand this opening better. And of course, you're gonna see everything else in action. Here on the side, you're going to see what the white pieces are looking for every time. So feel free to take notes of this and remember it for when you play your games. But anyways, you should be seeing these ideas, or at least most of them, in these games that I'm going to show you. So this first game started with the move pawn to d4, then we have knight f6, knight f3, pawn to e6, and now we just go pawn to e3. So this is another thing. You could play this against anything, guys. Even if they play the King's Indian defense, you could use the same setup. Of course, maybe the plans are going to change a little bit, but you're gonna make it to the middle game every time without difficulties. So after pawn to e3, we have pawn to c5, and remember, whenever we see this, we're not gonna trade our central pawn for that side pawn. Instead, we continue with our game, and if they take us, then we replace the pawn with another pawn. So bishop goes to d3, and then we have pawn to d5. Guys, these are some of the little things that you need to be familiar with. Whenever you have these pawns over here, we need to be careful with c4. Like in this game, the white pieces just castled, and I don't like it that much because then c4 is going to make you move the bishop again, and they could continue to expand on the queen side. So instead, what I like to do, and what you're going to see a lot, is you're going to insert a move that you have to do anyways. So remember how I told you have to do b3 for the fianchetto? Well, here b3 also helps you prevent c4. So you could do b3, and then later you could castle. But anyways, in this game, they just castled, then knight to c6, and at this point, the white pieces did pawn to b3. So you see, at the end of the day, you transpose into the same position. So that flexibility is really nice. So now we have bishop d6, bishop b2, and then one more thing that you need to know about this opening, or at least the setup that the black pieces are utilizing. When they have the knight on c6, you need to take a look at the possibility of knight b4. And again, this is such a nice bishop that we wouldn't want to trade it for that knight. Now, what you're going to see a lot of people doing is pawn to a3, just a prophylactic move, preventing the knight from going to b4. At the same time, some people don't really like to do a3 because they say, you know what, if they did knight b4 right now, I could just do check, right? Now, it becomes more important when they have castled the king so that the check is not there. But even if that's the case, some people don't mind it because if knight b4, they just go back to e2, and the same tempo that you wasted by going back and forth, the black pieces are going to waste it when you do a3, kicking the knight out, and they have to go back. So just something out there for you to keep in mind. I like to do a3 whenever I see this knight on c6 ready to go to b4. But anyways, In this game, after bishop to d6, bishop b2, the black pieces simply castled, and now knight b to d2 and queen to e7. Guys, at this point, this is already move number 8. We have developed the minor pieces, we have castled, and we are controlling the center. Everything that we are supposed to be doing. From here, we need to understand how we want to continue in the middle game. For you and for me, we have to understand if we want to do the knight e5 plan or the c4 plan. Now, one thing to keep in mind, when I teach this to my students, I many times tell them of queen e2, like if queen e2 is part of this first part. And to be honest, once you connect the rooks is when you can say that the opening is over. But you're gonna see also in many games, I remember back in lesson 84, I played a blitz game with this opening, and I don't think I did queen e2. Also in lesson number 65, when we talked about how the rooks could be better than the queen, I showed you a game played by the 5th world champion, and the game that he played, I think, he just went knight e5 without the queen coming to e2 first. So this is something that you're going to try them both, with and without, and then you're going to see which one you like the most. But anyways, after queen e7, we have knight e5. So in this game, they decided to go for the more aggressive plan, knight e5. You could have done c4 as well, but knight e5 was their choice. Notice how they cannot take with the knight, because that's going to be a fork. Remember, the bishop is back here. And if they take with the bishop, then we take with the pawn. The knight needs to move. And guys, we have a lot of space on the king side. You should know from here, you could do rook f3, rook h3, sometimes queen h5 right away. We just play chess. But this is definitely a very nice position to attack on the king side. So anyways, let me go back. After knight to e5, they just did rook to d8. No one is touching that knight. And at the same time, they're putting the rook on the same file as our queen. And this king could come out and leave in case there's an attack on the king side. So now white to move, and look at the move that they did. Pawn to a3. So only now they're getting concerned about this knight b4 to eliminate the bishop. So they know what they want as the white pieces, and they do not want this knight to make the bishop go away from this nice diagonal. So after pawn to a3, knight goes to d7. This is a plan that many people do to finally kick the knight out. They don't want to trade. They want to do f6 at some point. So maybe now we do f4, and that's going to prevent them from taking on e5. But then when the pawn comes, that knight is going to have to leave. Now, of course, we have pawn to f4, then knight to f8. Now, the knight is not only supporting h7, but this knight could also sometimes come to g6 and is also doing a good job defensively. Now, after knight f8, queen h5 right away. They did not even use the rook lift. They're just going straight for it to put pressure on h7 and on f7. Now, pawn to f6, and they're asking us to leave because they don't want so many pieces around the king. Now, guys, at this point, I want you to pause the video and try to think about this position on your own. Let's say you got this far in the game. What would you do next? Feel free to pause the video, and you don't have to tell me in the comments, just think of what you would do. Well, in this specific position, the white pieces demonstrated that they really understand the spirit of this opening, the spirit of this strategy that they decided to adopt, or this plan with knight e5. So instead of just moving the knight, they did rook f3, very powerful move. At this point, we don't really mind it if they take, because this rook, the queen, the bishop are enough to get that king in trouble. Now, after rook f3, the black pieces just did queen e8. They want the queen out. If you're being attacked, you want to remove the most powerful piece they have. But guys, what if they had taken on e5? Well, at that point, of course, we take with the f pawn, and notice how we are attacking their bishop. And if they decide to move that bishop back, there's a very strong continuation for the white pieces. Of course, feel free to pause the video again, see if you can find the right continuation. Now we're talking about tactics. Everything is in place for us. Well, of course, we're putting pressure on h7, but the knight is defending, so the first move is going to be, let's try to do it in our head without moving the pieces. Rook takes, f8 check. And if the rook takes, of course, we're going to have checkmate into moves. We have check, king goes to f7, and bishop g6, checkmate. Now, if after we do this, the king goes to take the knight, well, I think we could bring this rook to f1, and the rest is history. So for that reason, guys, they did not take on e5. Instead, like I said before, queen e8, And you should know, we are attacking, we're putting pressure, we do not want to trade queen. So instead, queen h4, that knight still cannot be captured, so they decided to do c takes d4. You and I know how we continue when they take on d4. We've replaced it with the other pawn. So e takes d4. Now pawn to h5, trying to get away from that, all of that pressure. Now this rook that is doing nothing is coming to f1. F takes e5 finally. And now guys, what do we do next as the white pieces? Well, we have been talking about this, so if you're ever in a situation like this, f takes e5, hitting that bishop, bishop goes to e7, queen goes to g3, bishop d7. Notice how we are down a piece, but if you look at the king side, right? So if I just, from this side to the right, if you look at the pieces that they have the queen, bishop, and knight. We have the queen, two rooks, and the bishop is aiming there. So we have more attackers than they have defenders. And it's hard for their pieces from the queen side to come over to help on the king side. So just to show you how the game continued after bishop d7, we have rook f4, rook d to c8. Guys, this move, I know it doesn't make much sense, but there's nothing better they could do here. If they do something like h4, well, the queen just goes to g4. It's just really hard to play this as the black pieces. I've been there myself in a position where I'm up material, but I'm being attacked, my pieces are tangled, and it's really hard to play this. It's very painful to defend these positions where you don't have any activity at all. So rook d to c8, then knight f3, we bring more pieces to the king side, queen goes to d8, just trying to control all of this diagonal. But still, the white pieces went knight to g5. Of course, you have to calculate, you need to take your time. But here the point, guys, is that if bishop takes g5, we have rook f8. And of course, after we get the queen, we're going to pick up on g5. And still, their pieces are on the queen side doing nothing. So after knight to g5, very powerful move, we have queen to b6. And now a move that all of us know is just really, really powerful. Rook f7 on the 7th rank. And the queen is also indirectly putting pressure on that pawn on g7. So now g6, of course, not to get checkmated on g7. And now, guys, this is a good moment again for you to try to find the next move for the white pieces. I gotta tell you, this is now completely tactical. We gotta find a very strong move here to just break through and finish this game. And this is why it's so important. If you learn all of these openings, if you decide to go for this more aggressive approach and you're not doing your tactics, you're not training consistently, then there's no point, because many of these positions, guys, are get really sharp, and the winner is going to be the person that can pull these tactics off. So it's white to move here. Try to pause the video and see if you can find the next move. Well, the move that we're looking for here for the white pieces is simply the same idea. We want to open up the queen. So knight takes e6, very powerful move, really hard to see. In this game, they just went knight e5, but if they had done bishop takes e6, guys, the game is over. Same thing, we need to take on g6, so the knight is the defender. We take the knight, and if they take with the bishop, with the rook, it doesn't matter to us. We're going to do check, followed by checkmate. So in this game, again, the black pieces saw this, of course, and instead of taking, they went knight takes e5. Now, queen takes on e5. We're throwing checkmate on g7. Then knight e6, the knight continues to defend, but then after bishop g6, the game is pretty much over. Notice that we're about to do checkmate with bishop h7. In the game, they just went knight f4 and queen g7, checkmate. Now, guys, I know that it was not as simple as just set your pieces and go ahead and attack the king, but this is pretty much what you're going to be seeing in your games if you decide to do this plan with knight to e5. So knight b4, remember, we're not that concerned about it. Here they castled, then knight b to d2, queen e7, knight e5 was the beginning of that attack. Notice that they did not do this idea of rook f3 right away, but they ended up doing it, guys. It's just a maneuver that you have to be familiar with. So rook queen h5 first, but soon after rook f3. Now, don't think that every time you play this, you have to sacrifice a knight or anything like that. You could have probably just take on c6, followed by rook f3, and you still get a pretty nice position. But in this case, absolutely, rook f3 directly was the accurate continuation. Okay, guys, so assuming that you still have some energy left, we're going to go over a second game, and I wanted to show you this one because you're going to see also an aggressive attack, but Susan Polgar, who was playing with the white pieces, chose a different plan, and maybe you like it better. Now, after d4, knight f6, we have knight f3, pawn to d5, e3, e6, bishop to d3, pawn to c5, and you see we have the same setup. Now, in this game, Susan actually did pawn to b3, and remember, we want to prevent c4, and we have to do that move anyways. So after pawn to b3, we have knight b to d7, castle, bishop e7, bishop b2, castle, and then knight b to d2. Again, we finished developing our minor pieces, we castled, and after b6, the white pieces go knight to e5. Again, the same plan instead of c4, but you're going to see now how after bishop b7, instead of f4, the white pieces decided to do queen f3, and that's why I wanted to show you this game. This is a different plan, but I think it's really interesting, and it's gonna be more information for you guys. You're going to decide if you like this one better or the other one, or both. So within this opening, you still have room to surprise your opponent with this different idea. So after queen f3, we have rook c8, and now rook a to d1. So this is part of the idea of queen f3. We leave d1 for the rook, and even though this file is not open or semi-open, it could easily open up, and that rook is going to be very well placed. And of course, this queen also is coming to f3 to move over to h3 and put pressure on h7. And by the way, from h3, guys, this queen is also putting pressure on d7 along with the rook. So it is a long shot, but sometimes this idea could actually work out. So the queen is on h3 with many intentions, but don't ignore the possibility of these two pieces working together on d7. So anyways, after rook a to d1, we have queen to c7. Remember, knight e5 is only going to be helping the white pieces because we just get more space on the side that we want to attack. So again, queen c7 instead, and now queen h3. Guys, the moment the queen gets here, this is already really delicate because the white pieces are already threatening to open up this diagonal. So something like d takes e5, knight takes d7, and even if they do queen takes, the bishop comes over to eliminate the defender of h7, and then we do the checkmate. So you see, just like this file is, it looks like it's impossible to open up, the same thing could be said about this diagonal, but we could, in two moves, just open it up for the bishop to eliminate the defender, and then checkmate. So anyways, after queen h3, pawn to h6, taking care of that, and now pawn to f4. Familiar? Yes, this is the same idea. The white pieces just did queen f3, queen h3 first, but the mini maneuver, f4, rook f3, all of these things are present at some point. Now, knight to e4, and guys, this knight e4 is thematic here for the black pieces, but two things to keep in mind. Many times we just take it, and then the bishop goes to this diagonal, but notice how we left them with this double pawn. So if we get to an endgame, this is going to be a better endgame for us because they have the double pawns, and at the same time they're blocking up the bishop. So this is just something, we're far from an endgame, but something to keep in mind. If you get to an endgame, well, they have a pawn structure that is inferior. It could be better for me to get to that endgame. So anyways, going back here, they did not take on e4 right away. Instead, we have knight takes d7, queen takes d7. Look, the queen is already on that file. It's a long shot, but it's there. So bishop takes e4, d takes e4, d takes e5, and just like that, we cleared that file. Now we're ready for a discovered attack on the queen. So of course, we have queen b5. If they had just taken back, we capture on e4 with a discovered on the queen. So guys, this plan, again, it's not gonna be like this every time, but it's very important to have it present just in case. So anyways, in this game, after d takes e5, queen b5 instead, so they got the queen out, and now knight to c4, we continue to play chess. I'm going to show you the rest of the game for you to see how it ended, but this is already, guys, a very comfortable position for the white pieces, and they didn't do anything extraordinary, just the same plans that we have talked about, and of course, they have to know what they're doing tactically. Now, after knight c4, bishop takes on c5, then queen g4, look at this, it's straightforward. I just want to do checkmate on g7. What are you going to do about it? So pawn to f6, the moment this pawn is pushed to attack the knight on e5 or to block this kind of threats, e6 is going to be weak. So of course, queen e6 check, king goes to h8, rook d7, and now the rook got to the 7th rank. So the black pieces did one last move, which is rook c6, and after queen g4, the black pieces resign. We're still threatening checkmate on g7, not so easy to take care of it, and even if they did with rook g8, then we just collect the bishop on b7. So guys, as you can see, again, a pretty smooth game, and I'm gonna repeat it again. It's not gonna be like this every time, but it's just simple to get to the middle game, and you have very good plans, very good perspectives once you get to the middle game. 95, don't forget, you could have also done c4. Now guys, in the next lesson, you're gonna see me playing this opening a lot, but before I let you go, let me tell you a few other things that you need to understand about this opening. Number one, let me talk about how you could, with this opening, you could try to affect your opponent. One of the things is that you could use different move orders to get to the same position. Like for example, I myself sometimes do knight f3, you know that sometimes I do g3, bishop g2, and I get into these King's Indian attack positions, but sometimes I could do, maybe they do this, I could just go d4, or I could do e3 and then b3, and later on I could do pawn to d4, and I just got into the same position but different move order. Of course, at a certain level, people will know exactly what you're doing, but sometimes people might just not even understand what you're trying to play. I know people who start with b3 and it's like they're playing the Larsen, and then a few moves later, they could, after e3, they could easily transpose by doing d4, knight f3. And in my case, sometimes I do f4 because I like to play sometimes the bird's opening. So I just wanted to say, if there's someone that you have been playing, they know you're ready, and you want to try to trick them, maybe this is a good idea to try to change the move order, or simply you could change the plans. You know you have one plan with 95, one plan with c4. Another thing is, this could be played also as the black pieces. So let's say you have something like knight f3, knight f6, I don't know, e6, e6, they do c4. You could do the same thing. You see b6, then bishop d6, bishop b7. So let me just show you that way. Let me see if I can flip the board and it's easier for you to see. You see? So bishop d6, let's say we have bishop e2, castle, and we have just the same position. Knight b to d7, and from there you could do knight e4, or you could do c5. Of course, it's not like when we talked about the King's Indian defense or the Pirs that you could also play with roles reversed. I mean, you could, but it's not so easily. It depends on what the white pieces do. But just keep it in mind. Now, another thing that I wanted to point out is that sometimes if you're playing someone who plays the Slav, let's say c6, they might just do something like bishop f5. This, for many people, could be a little bit annoying because they're not used to it. But guys, you could continue with your same plan. Bishop d3, if they take, well, here you could do c takes d3, you're going to get a semi-open file. You have a lot of control over the center, or you could just take with the queen, and your pawn structure remains healthy and you continue to play chess. All right, so with that said, I'm going to leave it here, guys. We're going to have another opportunity next lesson to talk more about it. I'm going to be playing games, and if you have any questions, you let me know in the comments and maybe I cover it in our next lesson. For now, I'm going to leave it here and I'll talk to you next time.